Picture this. You're scrolling through your phone, planning that perfect summer getaway. Sun, sand, relaxation. What could go wrong? Well, what you're about to hear will make you think twice before booking that isolated cabin or that remote beach house. These aren't just stories. These are real events that turn dream vacations into living nightmares. And trust me, after hearing these 5 disturbing tales, you might want to stick to staycations. So, dim the lights, lock your doors, and prepare yourself for 5 true summer holiday horror stories that will haunt you long after the sun goes down. In July 2018, the Henderson family thought they'd found paradise, a secluded lake house in northern Michigan, 3 hours from the nearest town, perfect for a week-long escape from city life. Mark Henderson, his wife Sarah, and their 2 teenage kids, Emma and Jake, packed their bags with nothing but excitement. The house sat on the edge of Crystal Lake, surrounded by dense pine forest. No neighbors for miles. No cell service. Just them and nature. Exactly what they wanted, or so they thought. The first 2 days were perfect. Swimming, fishing, campfires under the stars. But on the 3rd night, things started going wrong. Sarah woke up to strange scratching sounds coming from outside their bedroom window. She nudged Mark awake. "Do you hear that?" Mark listened. Scratch. Scratch, scratch, like fingernails dragging across wood. "Probably just a raccoon," he whispered, but his voice betrayed his unease. The scratching stopped. The next morning, Mark walked around the house to investigate. What he found made his blood run cold. Deep scratches carved into the wooden siding, right below their bedroom window. But these weren't animal scratches. They were too deliberate, too organized. Someone had been standing there, dragging something sharp across the wood while they slept. Mark decided not to tell the family. He didn't want to ruin their vacation over what might be a prank. But that night, the scratching returned. This time, it moved around the entire house, starting at their window, then slowly circling the building. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Sarah grabbed Mark's arm. "That's not an animal." The scratching stopped directly at the front door. Then came the knocking. Slow, deliberate knocks. 3 at a time. Knock, knock, knock. Pause. Knock, knock, knock. Mark crept to the window and peeked through the curtain. In the moonlight, he saw a figure standing at their door. Tall, thin, wearing what looked like dark clothing. The person's face was hidden in shadow, but Mark could feel eyes staring back at him. The knocking stopped. The figure didn't move. Mark's heart pounded as he reached for his phone, only to remember there was no signal. They were completely cut off from help. The nearest neighbor was miles away through dense forest. After what felt like hours, the figure finally walked away, disappearing into the tree line. The family didn't sleep that night. They huddled together in the living room, jumping at every sound. When morning came, Mark made the decision to pack up and leave immediately. But as they loaded their car, Emma screamed from the back seat, "Dad, look at the house." Carved into the front door were words that made their blood freeze. "You can't leave." The car keys were missing from Mark's pocket. They searched frantically, dumping out bags, checking every surface. Nothing. Then Jake noticed something that made everyone go silent. Fresh footprints in the dirt around their car. Someone had been there while they were inside, close enough to reach through the open car window and take the keys. Mark knew they had to get help, but the nearest road was 3 miles through thick forest. With no choice left, he told his family they would have to hike out together. they couldn't stay another night. As they started walking down the overgrown trail, Sarah heard something that made her freeze. The sound of their car engine starting behind them. They turned to see their vehicle backing out of the driveway, with a dark silhouette behind the wheel. The family ran through the forest for what felt like hours, branches tearing at their clothes, roots trying to trip them. They finally reached the main road just as the sun was setting. A passing truck stopped and took them to the nearest police station. When officers went to investigate the lake house the next day, they found it empty. No signs of the mysterious visitor. No scratches on the walls. No words carved into the door. Even the car was back in the driveway. Keys in the ignition. But inside the house, they discovered something that proved the Henderson story was real. Hidden in the basement was a small room they'd never seen before. Inside were dozens of photographs. Pictures of families at the lake house. Families swimming, eating, sleeping. The photos went back decades. At the bottom of the pile was a photo of the Hendersons, taken through their bedroom window on their first night there. Sarah was clearly visible, brushing her teeth in the bathroom mirror. Someone had been watching them from the very beginning. The case remains open. The identity of the stalker was never discovered. And the lake house? It's still available for rent. The listing just doesn't mention what comes with your stay. Summer of 2019. College friends Ashley, Mike, and Chloe decided to split the cost of a beach house rental in the Outer Banks of North Carolina. A week of sun, surf, and freedom before their senior year began. The house was perfect, right on the beach. Isolated enough for privacy, but close enough to town for supplies. What they didn't know was that they weren't the first group to rent this particular house, and they wouldn't be the last to experience its dark secret. The first 3 days were exactly what they'd hoped for. Beach days, late-night bonfires, and the kind of carefree fun that makes perfect Instagram posts. But on Thursday night, things took a turn that would haunt them forever. Ashley woke up around 2 a.m. to use the bathroom. As she walked down the hallway, she noticed something strange. The sliding glass door to the deck was open. She was sure they'd locked it before bed. They'd been careful about security since arriving. She closed the door and made sure it was locked tight. But as she turned to head back to her room, she saw wet footprints on the hardwood floor. Large footprints, leading from the open door straight to the staircase that led to the bedrooms upstairs. Someone had been in their house while they were sleeping. Ashley's heart raced as she followed the wet trail. It led up the stairs, down the hallway, and stopped directly outside Mike's bedroom door. The door was slightly open, and she could hear Mike's steady breathing inside. She wanted to wake her friends, but something made her freeze. A sound from downstairs. The sliding door opening again. Ashley crept to the top of the stairs and peered down. In the dim light from the deck, she saw a figure entering the house. Tall, wearing dark clothing, moving with purpose. The person looked up the stairs, and for a terrifying moment, Ashley thought they made eye contact. She ran to Mike's room and shook him awake. "Someone's in the house," she whispered urgently. Mike sat up immediately. He'd always been the protective one in their group. Where? Downstairs. They were up here already. Mike, they were standing outside your door. Mike grabbed a baseball bat they'd brought for beach games and motioned for Ashley to wake Chloe. The three friends huddled together in Mike's room, listening to sounds from below. Footsteps, doors opening and closing, someone searching through their belongings. Mike pulled out his phone to call 911, but there was no signal. The isolation that had seemed so perfect now felt like a trap. "We need to get out," Chloe whispered. But as if the intruder had heard her, the footsteps started coming up the stairs. Slow, deliberate steps. The person wasn't trying to be quiet anymore. Mike positioned himself by the door with the bat raised. The footsteps stopped right outside their room. They could see a shadow in the gap under the door. Someone was standing there, listening. Then came a voice. Low, raspy, barely human. "I know you're awake." The friends pressed themselves against the far wall, trying not to breathe. The doorknob slowly turned, but Mike had locked it. "Open the door," the voice said. "I just want to talk." Mike gripped the bat tighter. "Get away from here or I'm calling the police." A laugh echoed from the hallway. "No signal out here, just you and me." That's when they realized this person knew about the isolation. Knew they couldn't call for help. This wasn't random, it was planned. The doorknob rattled more aggressively. Then came a new sound. Scratching. Someone was using something sharp on the lock. "The window," Ashley whispered. Mike's room had a window that opened onto the deck roof. If they could get out there, they might be able to climb down and run for the car. As the scratching at the door continued, Mike quietly opened the window. One by one, they climbed out onto the roof. The ocean wind whipped around them as they carefully made their way to the edge. Behind them, they heard the bedroom door finally open. They dropped from the roof and ran for their car, not caring about the noise they made. Mike fumbled with the keys while Ashley and Chloe watched the house. A figure appeared at the upstairs window, watching them. The car started, and they sped away from the beach house, not stopping until they reached the main highway. Only then did they call the police from a gas station. When officers arrived at the beach house an hour later, they found the sliding door wide open, just as the friends had described. But there was no sign of an intruder. However, in Mike's room, they discovered something that confirmed the terrifying encounter. Carved into the bedroom door were words that made everyone go silent. "Next time, open the door." The investigation revealed a disturbing pattern. Over the past 5 years, multiple groups had reported similar incidents at beach house rentals throughout the Outer Banks. Always the same description: a tall figure in dark clothing who seemed to know the house's layouts and security weaknesses. 2 other groups hadn't been as lucky as Ashley, Mike, and Chloe. They'd been found the next morning, still in their beds, but with all their valuables missing and strange symbols carved into the walls around them. Both groups reported feeling like they'd been drugged, with gaps in their memory from the night of the incidents. The beach house where the friends stayed has since been removed from all rental websites, but locals say that on certain nights, lights can still be seen moving through the empty house, and footprints appear in the sand leading from the water to the deck. The intruder was never caught, and somewhere along the coast, he might still be watching new groups of vacationers, waiting for the perfect moment to make his next move. August 2017. 4 co-workers decided to celebrate their company's success with a long weekend at a remote cabin in the Colorado Rockies. David, Lisa, Tom, and Jennifer had found what seemed like the perfect retreat, a rustic cabin nestled deep in the mountains, miles from the nearest town. The drive up the winding mountain road took 3 hours, with the last 30 minutes on a dirt path barely wide enough for their SUV. The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by towering pine trees, with a crystal clear stream running nearby. It looked like something from a postcard, but beauty can hide the most terrifying secrets. The first day was everything they'd hoped for. Hiking, fishing in the stream, and enjoying the kind of peace that only comes from being completely disconnected from the world. No cell service, no internet, no distractions, just 4 friends in the wilderness. That night, as they sat around the fire pit outside the cabin, Jennifer noticed something odd. "Did you guys see that?" "See what?" David asked. "I thought I saw a light moving through the trees over there." She pointed toward the thick forest on the far side of the clearing. They all stared into the darkness. but saw nothing. "Probably just our eyes playing tricks," Tom said. "It's pretty dark out here." But Jennifer wasn't convinced. She'd distinctly seen what looked like a flashlight beam weaving between the trees, as if someone was walking through the forest, someone watching them. They decided to call it a night around midnight. The cabin had 2 bedrooms. David and Tom shared one, while Lisa and Jennifer took the other. As they settled in for sleep, the only sounds were the crackling of dying embers from the fire and the gentle babbling of the nearby stream. Around 3 a.m., Lisa woke to a sound that made her blood run cold. Footsteps on the cabin's wooden porch. Slow, deliberate steps, as if someone was trying not to make noise. She lay perfectly still, listening. The footsteps moved from one end of the porch to the other, pausing at each window. Someone was checking each one, looking for a way in. Lisa gently shook Jennifer awake and pressed a finger to her lips. Jennifer's eyes went wide as she heard the sounds too. The footsteps had stopped at the front door. They could hear the doorknob being tested. Thankfully, David had locked it before bed. The testing stopped. But then came a new sound that made both women's hearts race. Scratching at the door. Someone was trying to pick the lock. Lisa crept to their bedroom door and listened. She could hear David and Tom's steady breathing from across the hall. They were still asleep. She had to wake them without alerting whoever was outside. She tiptoed across the hallway and gently shook David awake. His eyes opened immediately, and she put her hand over his mouth before he could speak. "Someone's trying to break in," she whispered directly into his ear. David's training as a former security guard kicked in. He quietly woke Tom and motioned for everyone to gather in the back bedroom, furthest from the front door. As they huddled together, the scratching at the lock continued. Then they heard something that made their blood freeze. The sound of the front door slowly creaking open. Someone was inside the cabin. David grabbed a heavy flashlight from the nightstand, the closest thing to a weapon they had. They could hear footsteps moving through the main room, deliberately slow, as if the intruder was examining everything. "Stay here," David whispered to the others. "If I yell, run out the back door and get to the car." But before he could move, the footsteps started coming toward the bedrooms. The wooden floorboards creaked with each step. Whoever was out there wasn't trying to be quiet anymore. The footsteps stopped. Right outside their door, through the thin wood, they could hear breathing, heavy, labored breathing, like someone who'd been running, or someone who was excited. Then came a voice that would haunt them forever, barely above a whisper, but clear enough to understand. "I know you're in there." Jennifer pressed her hand over her mouth to keep from screaming. The doorknob slowly turned, but Tom had locked it when they'd gathered in the room. "Open the door," the voice continued. "I just want to meet you." David raised the flashlight, ready to fight if necessary. But then the intruder did something unexpected. Instead of trying to force the door, the footsteps moved away, back toward the front of the cabin. They heard the front door close. The 4 friends waited in terrified silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Finally, David crept to the window and peered through the curtain. "I don't see anyone," he whispered, but Tom was looking out the other window. "David," he said urgently. "The car." David moved to Tom's window and felt his heart sink. Their SUV was sitting on 4 flat tires. Deep slashes in the sidewalls made it clear this was deliberate. They were stranded in the mountains, with no way to call for help and no way to leave. "We need to barricade ourselves in," David said. "Wait until daylight, then hike out." They moved furniture against the doors and took turns keeping watch. As dawn approached, Jennifer was at the window when she saw something that made her scream. Hanging from a tree at the edge of the clearing was a mannequin dressed in clothes identical to what Lisa had been wearing the day before. A sign around its neck read, "She's next." David made the decision to leave immediately. Flat tires or not. They would drive on the rims if they had to. But when they got outside, they discovered their nightmare was far from over. The SUV's engine had been destroyed. The hood was open and wires were cut, hoses severed. Someone had made sure they couldn't leave. With no other choice, they started hiking down the mountain road. It was 15 miles to the nearest town, but they had to try. They'd been walking for about an hour when they heard it, the sound of an engine behind them. Someone was driving up the mountain road. They flagged down the pickup truck, relieved to see an elderly local man behind the wheel. "You folks okay?" he asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." David quickly explained what had happened. The man's expression grew serious. "You were staying at the old Henderson cabin?" "I think so." "Why?" The man was quiet for a long moment. "That cabin's been trouble for years. Folks rent it. Strange things happen. Most people just leave early and don't talk about it." "But someone was there," Lisa said. "Someone real." "Oh, I believe you," the man replied. "Problem is, nobody's ever caught him. Could be some local gone wrong. Could be someone from out of state using the area to target tourists. All I know is you're not the first ones to come walking down this road looking scared to death." The local man drove them to town, where they reported the incident to the sheriff's department. Officers went to investigate the cabin, but found it empty. Their belongings were still there, neatly arranged, but there was no sign of their intruder. However, they did find something disturbing. Hidden under the cabin was a small space containing dozens of personal items, jewelry, cameras, wallets, car keys, items that clearly belonged to previous visitors. The investigation revealed that over the past decade, more than 20 groups had reported similar incidents at remote cabins throughout the Colorado mountains. Always the same pattern: isolation, disabled vehicles, and a mysterious intruder who seemed to know exactly how to trap his victims. 3 groups had never made it out. They were found days later, deep in the forest, with no memory of how they'd gotten there. All reported feeling like they'd been drugged and had large gaps in their memory. The cabin has since been shut down, but the intruder was never caught. Locals believe he's moved on to other rental properties in the area, still targeting unsuspecting vacationers who just want to enjoy the peaceful mountains. David, Lisa, Tom, and Jennifer made it home safely, but they've never forgotten those terrifying hours. And sometimes, late at night, they still wonder who was watching them from the forest and what would have happened if they hadn't been able to escape. In June 2020, during the height of the pandemic, brothers Jake and Ryan Mitchell decided to escape the lockdown stress with a camping trip to Joshua Tree National Park in California. They wanted complete isolation, desert, just them, the desert, and endless stars. They found the perfect spot, miles from the nearest campground, accessible only by a rough dirt road that their Jeep could barely handle. No other campers, no park rangers, no cell service. Exactly what they were looking for, or so they thought. The first night was magical. They set up camp near a cluster of the park's famous Joshua trees, cooked dinner over an open fire, and fell asleep to the complete silence that only the desert can provide. Jake woke up around 4 a.m. to a sound that didn't belong in the desert silence: the soft crunch of footsteps on gravel. He lay still in his sleeping bag, listening. The footsteps were circling their campsite, staying just beyond the dying light of their fire. He quietly reached over and shook Ryan awake. His younger brother opened his eyes and immediately understood something was wrong. "Someone's out there," Jake whispered. They both listened as the footsteps continued their slow circle around their camp. Whoever it was, wasn't trying to hide their presence anymore. In fact, the steps seemed deliberately loud, as if the person wanted to be heard. Jake grabbed his flashlight and unzipped the tent flap slightly. He pointed the beam toward where he'd heard the footsteps, but saw nothing except desert scrub and rock formations. The footsteps stopped. "Hello?" Jake called out. "Is someone there?" No response. Just the eerie silence of the desert night. They waited in their tent for what felt like hours, but heard nothing more. Eventually, exhaustion overtook fear, and they managed to fall back asleep. When they woke at sunrise, Jake decided to investigate. Walking around their campsite, he found clear boot prints in the sand, just as he'd suspected. But what he discovered next made his blood run cold. The prints formed a perfect circle around their tent, about 20 feet out. Someone had spent considerable time walking around their campsite while they slept. But that wasn't the worst part. At the north, south, east, and west points of the circle, someone had left objects. 4 small piles of rocks, arranged in careful pyramids. Each pile had a piece of paper tucked underneath. With shaking hands, Jake pulled out the first note. Written in block letters were the words, "Watched you sleep." The second note, "Beautiful dreams." The third, "Tomorrow night." The fourth note made Jake's legs nearly give out. "Bring your brother." Ryan saw his brother's face go white. "What is it?" Jake showed him the notes without saying a word. Ryan read them twice before the full horror sank in. "We're leaving," Jake said. "Right now." But as they started packing their gear, they realized they had a problem. Their Jeep wouldn't start. Jake tried multiple times, but got nothing. He popped the hood and immediately saw the issue. Someone had cut several essential wires. They were stranded in the desert with no way to call for help, and someone was planning to return that night. "We hike out," Jake decided. "The main road is about 8 miles south." They packed only the essentials: water, some food, and Jake's hunting knife. The desert heat was already building, even though it was still early morning. In summer temperatures, they would need to reach help before the day got too hot, or they'd face dehydration on top of their other problems. They'd been walking for about 2 hours when Ryan spotted something that made them both stop dead. Smoke, rising from exactly where their campsite was located. "Someone's there," Ryan said. "Someone's at our camp." Jake pulled out his binoculars and focused on the distant smoke. He could barely make out a figure moving around their abandoned campsite. Whoever had been stalking them had returned, and in broad daylight. "We keep moving," Jake said. "Faster." But after another hour of hiking through increasingly difficult terrain, they made a terrifying discovery. Fresh tire tracks in the sand, leading from the direction of their camp toward the main road they were trying to reach. Someone was driving out there. Someone who knew the area well enough to navigate the rough desert roads. Jake and Ryan hid behind a large boulder as they heard an engine approaching. A dirty pickup truck came into view, driving slowly along what barely passed for a road. The truck stopped, and Jake could see the driver scanning the desert, clearly looking for something. Looking for them. The driver got out of the truck, and Jake got his first clear look at their stalker. A tall, thin man wearing desert camouflage, with long gray hair and a beard. He looked like someone who'd been living in the wilderness for years. The man walked to the exact spot where Jake and Ryan had been hiding just minutes earlier. He examined their footprints in the sand, then looked up and stared directly at the boulder where they were now concealed. Jake held his breath, certain they'd been spotted. But after a long moment, the man returned to his truck and drove further down the road, still searching. The brothers waited until the engine sounds faded completely before moving. But now they faced a terrible choice. The main road was still miles away, and their stalker was out there in a vehicle, hunting for them. Jake made a decision that probably saved their lives. Instead of continuing toward the road, they would head for the high ground, a ridge about 2 miles to the west, where they might get cell phone signal and could see anyone approaching. The climb was brutal in the growing heat, but they pushed themselves harder than they'd ever pushed before. Fear is a powerful motivator. When they finally reached the ridge, Jake's phone showed 1 bar of signal. He immediately called 911. 911, what's your emergency? We're stranded in the desert near Joshua Tree, Jake said quickly. Someone's been stalking us, and our vehicle was sabotaged. The dispatcher took their GPS coordinates and promised to send help immediately, but it would take at least 2 hours for rescue teams to reach them. From their position on the ridge, they could see for miles. The pickup truck was still out there, methodically searching the desert below them. The driver seemed to know the area incredibly well, checking behind every large rock formation and cluster of trees. After what felt like an eternity, they heard the most beautiful sound imaginable: helicopter rotors. A Park Service helicopter appeared over the horizon, and Jake used his phone's flashlight to signal their location. Within minutes, they were being lifted to safety. Later investigation revealed the disturbing truth about their desert stalker. The man in the pickup truck was a former park employee who'd been fired 3 years earlier for inappropriate behavior toward campers. Instead of leaving the area, he'd been living rough in the desert, using his knowledge of the park's remote areas to target isolated visitors. When authorities finally tracked him down, they found a camp hidden in a canyon about 10 miles from where the brothers had been staying. Inside his shelter were dozens of photographs taken with a telephoto lens, pictures of unsuspecting campers, hikers, and families, all taken without their knowledge. A journal found in his possession contained detailed entries about his subjects, including planned visits to their campsites. Jake and Ryan's names were in the most recent entry. The man was arrested and charged with stalking, criminal threatening, and vandalism. But during questioning, he revealed something that still gives the Mitchell brothers nightmares. He'd been watching them from the moment they'd arrived. He knew their names, their home address, their work schedules. He'd been planning their visit for weeks, waiting for the perfect opportunity when they were completely isolated. Jake and Ryan were lucky. They made smart decisions and kept their wits about them when terror tried to take over. But somewhere out there, in remote areas across the country, other predators might be watching, waiting for the perfect moment to turn someone's peaceful getaway into their worst nightmare. The brothers still go camping, but never alone, and never without multiple ways to call for help, because they learned the hard way that sometimes the most dangerous wildlife in the wilderness walks on 2 legs. July 2021. After a year of pandemic restrictions, married couple Sarah and Mike Chen were desperate for a real vacation. They found what seemed like a perfect opportunity: a small private island off the coast of Maine, available for weekly rentals. The island was only accessible by boat, with a single cottage nestled among pine trees on the rocky shore. The rental company provided transportation to and from the mainland, leaving guests with complete privacy for their stay. The boat captain who took them to the island was friendly but quiet. As he helped them unload their supplies, he mentioned almost casually, "Radio's in the cottage if you need anything," though reception can be spotty when the weather's bad. Sarah thought it was odd that he mentioned the radio first, rather than cell service. When she checked her phone, she saw he was right to be concerned. No signal at all. "When will you be back to pick us up?" Mike asked. "Sunday evening, like we arranged," the captain replied, "unless you radio for an earlier pickup." They waved goodbye as the boat disappeared around the rocky point, leaving them alone on their private island paradise. The cottage was perfect, rustic but comfortable, with a stone fireplace, full kitchen, and windows that looked out over the ocean. They spent their first day exploring the island, which was larger than they'd expected, with hidden coves, tide pools, and a small forest in the center. That night, as they cooked dinner and watched the sunset from the cottage deck, Sarah felt completely relaxed for the first time in months. No work emails, no traffic, no neighbors. Just them and the sound of waves on rocks. But paradise has a way of revealing its dark side when you least expect it. On their second night, Sarah woke up around 2 a.m. to a sound that didn't belong on their private island. Voices. Multiple people talking somewhere outside the cottage. She nudged Mike awake. "Do you hear that?" Mike listened for a moment, then sat up quickly. There were definitely voices out there, though he couldn't make out words. The voices seemed to be coming from the direction of the small beach where they'd arrived. Maybe the boat captain came back early? Sarah suggested hopefully. But as they listened more carefully, they realized there were too many voices. At least 4 or 5 people, maybe more. Mike grabbed a flashlight and went to the window that faced the beach. In the distance, he could see lights moving around near the water. Definitely not the single boat that had brought them to the island. "We should check the radio," Sarah whispered. The cottage's radio was an old emergency unit mounted on the kitchen wall. Mike tried several channels but got only static. The captain had warned them about reception problems, but the timing felt ominous. The voices outside grew louder, and now they could make out occasional words, rough male voices, using language that made Sarah's blood run cold. "Nobody knows they're here. Perfect setup. Take what we want." Mike grabbed Sarah's arm. "We need to hide. Now." The cottage had a small basement storage area, accessed through a trapdoor in the kitchen floor. It wasn't meant as a hiding place, but it was the best they had. They grabbed some supplies and quietly lifted the trapdoor, climbing down into the cramped space below. Mike pulled the trapdoor closed above them just as they heard the cottage's front door being tested. In the darkness below the kitchen floor, they held their breath as footsteps moved through the cottage above them. Heavy boots on wooden floors. Multiple people searching through their belongings. "Rich city folks," one voice said. "Look at this camera equipment. Check for cash," another voice replied. "And anything else valuable." Sarah pressed her face against Mike's shoulder, trying not to sob. This was supposed to be their safe getaway, and now they were trapped like animals while strangers ransacked their temporary home. The footsteps moved around the cottage for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. They heard furniture being moved, drawers being opened, their personal items being sorted through. Then one of the intruders said something that made both Sarah and Mike go cold. "Captain said they're here for the whole week. We can come back tomorrow night for the rest." They weren't just being robbed. These people planned to return. The footsteps finally moved toward the front door, and they could hear voices fading as the group moved away from the cottage. But Sarah and Mike stayed hidden until they were sure the intruders were gone. When they finally emerged from their hiding place, the cottage looked like a tornado had hit it. Clothes scattered, furniture overturned, their valuables missing. But what terrified them most was the realization that this hadn't been random. The intruders knew they were staying for a week. They knew the cottage's layout, and they planned to return. Mike tried the radio again, cycling through every channel. Finally, on a maritime emergency frequency, he made contact with the Coast Guard station on the mainland. "This is an emergency," he said quickly. "We're stranded on a private island and need immediate evacuation." The Coast Guard officer asked for their location and details. When Mike explained about the break-in, the officer's tone became serious. "Sir, we've had reports of similar incidents in that area. Can you get to a secure location and wait for pickup? Mike looked around the ransacked cottage. There's nowhere secure here. Then you need to hide until we can get to you. We're dispatching a boat now, but it'll be at least 2 hours. 2 hours felt like a lifetime when they knew the intruders planned to return. Sarah and Mike gathered essential supplies and left the cottage, heading for the island's interior where they might find better hiding spots. They found a cluster of large rocks near the center of the island that provided some cover while still allowing them to see the cottage. From there, they watched and waited. Around midnight, they saw lights on the water again. Multiple boats this time, approaching the island from different directions. These people weren't just opportunistic thieves, they were organized. The lights converged on the beach, and Sarah counted at least 8 or 10 people coming ashore. Far more than they'd heard at the cottage the night before. Mike tried the radio again, keeping his voice low. Coast Guard. This is the emergency on the private island. The intruders have returned in force. Multiple boats, at least 10 people. Copy that, sir. Our vessel is approximately 1 hour from your location. Stay hidden. From their hiding spot, Sarah and Mike watched as the group split up. Some went to the cottage, while others spread out across the island with flashlights. They were searching methodically, like people who knew exactly what they were doing. They're looking for us, Sarah whispered. The search pattern was moving in their direction. Soon, the intruders would reach their hiding spot among the rocks. Mike made a desperate decision. They would have to move, try to stay ahead of the search parties until the Coast Guard arrived. It was dangerous, but staying put meant certain capture. They crept away from their hiding spot, moving toward the island's far shore. But in the darkness, it was impossible to move quietly over the rocky terrain. Behind them, they could hear voices getting closer. Flashlight beams swept back and forth, methodically covering every possible hiding spot. Over here! Someone shouted. Fresh footprints! Sarah's heart sank. They'd been found. Mike grabbed her hand and they ran, no longer caring about noise. Branches whipped at their faces as they crashed through the island's small forest. Their pursuers closed behind. They reached the far shore just as a Coast Guard cutter appeared around the island's point, its searchlight cutting through the darkness. Coast Guard, Mike shouted at the top of his lungs. Here! We're here! The searchlight found them immediately, and within minutes, they were being pulled aboard the rescue vessel. Behind them, the lights of their pursuers had vanished back into the forest. The Coast Guard arrested 6 people that night, finding them hiding in caves on the island's north side. The investigation revealed a coordinated operation that had been targeting isolated vacation rentals for months. The group's leader was the boat captain who had brought Sarah and Mike to the island. He'd been working with a network of criminals, identifying wealthy tourists and setting them up for robbery and worse. The radio sabotage, the knowledge of guest schedules, the familiarity with the island's layout, it had all been planned from the moment they'd booked their private paradise. 3 other couples had disappeared from remote island rentals over the past year. Their bodies were never found. Sarah and Mike were lucky. They made smart decisions under pressure and fought back when fighting back seemed impossible. But they learned a terrifying truth that summer. BR1s. Sometimes the people you trust to keep you safe are the very ones planning to destroy you. The island rental company was shut down, but similar operations might still be running in remote coastal areas. Because when you're truly isolated, with no way to call for help, you're not paying for privacy. You might be paying to become someone's prey. These 5 stories share something more terrifying than any fictional horror movie could ever be. They're real. Every single detail, every moment of terror, Every life or death decision actually happened to real people who thought they were just taking a normal vacation. Think about that for a moment. The Henderson family at the lake house. Ashley, Mike, and Chloe at the beach. The co-workers in the Colorado mountains. Jake and Ryan in the desert. Sarah and Mike on their private island. They all started their trips the same way you start yours. Excited, relaxed, looking forward to getting away from it all. None of them expected to fight for their lives. But here's what's really disturbing. These aren't isolated incidents. Law enforcement agencies across the country have files filled with similar cases. Vacation rentals in remote locations that seem perfect until night falls. Isolated campgrounds where someone's always watching. Beach houses where the ocean isn't the only thing that can drag you under. The predators in these stories weren't random. They were organized. They studied their victims, learned their patterns, waited for the perfect moment when help was miles away and escape seemed impossible. And they're still out there. Right now, as you're watching this video, someone might be planning their next move, identifying their next victims, waiting for the next family to book that perfect isolated getaway. So, the next time you're planning a vacation, remember these stories. That beautiful remote cabin might come with more than just a scenic view. That private beach house might not be as private as you think. And that friendly local who offers to help might have plans that don't include letting you leave. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't ignore the red flags because you want to enjoy your vacation. Stay alert, stay together, and always have multiple ways to call for help. Because in the end, the most dangerous thing about these stories isn't that they happened, it's that they're still happening. Somewhere tonight, someone is living through their own vacation nightmare, fighting for their life in a place that was supposed to be paradise. Sweet dreams, and remember, not all getaways have happy endings. If you enjoyed these spine-chilling tales and want to hear more stories that will keep you awake at night, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We dive deep into the darkest corners of real-life horror every week, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Until then, stay safe out there. You never know who might be watching. If these stories made your skin crawl, like the video, it tells the algorithm you survived. Subscribe and turn on the bell. We drop new nightmares regularly. Share with someone brave, or someone who thinks they are. Comment below, we want to know what you would have done. Some stories don't end when the lights come on. This is Dread Dynasty. We'll see you in the next scare.